Tyler Green believed in foundations, solid ground beneath his feet, a steady job, a comfortable routine, a relationship built on shared quietude and predictable evenings. He wasn't a man of grand gestures or wild ambitions. His ambition was simply stability, the quiet hum of a life well ordered. He worked as an analyst, finding patterns in data, bringing order to chaos. His apartment was neat, his habits regular. He was, by all appearances, the bedrock of his own small world. Then, the earthquake. It wasn't sudden, not entirely, but the final collapse felt instantaneous. The job evaporated first, a victim of corporate restructuring. One day his desk was there, the next, it was just a space, and he held a severance package that felt more like a consolation prize for a race he hadn't known he was running. He came home early, the city's noise seeming louder, more mocking, without the buffer of purpose. He tried to explain it to Sarah, his wife. He used the same calm, analytical tone he used in reports, detailing the lack of options, the market outlook, but his voice lacked its usual conviction, the certainty replaced by a hollow echo. Sarah listened, her expression tight. Her own life had shifted subtly over the past few years, a quiet discontent growing beneath the surface of their shared routine. She had become restless, and his sudden instability seemed to crystallize her own unspoken desires for something different, something more. The conversation wasn't loud. It was conducted in hushed tones in the living room, the setting sun casting long, indifferent shadows. Words like space and different paths and "I can't do this anymore" hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Tyler, who dealt with complex spreadsheets and market trends, found himself utterly incapable of processing the data of human emotion. He saw the logic of her points, the cold truth that their paths were diverging, but the emotional reality was a physical blow. Within weeks she was gone, not with fanfare but with boxes packed efficiently, the apartment slowly regaining the sterile tidiness it had before his things, their things, had filled it. The silence she left behind was deafening, a stark contrast to the quiet companionship he had become accustomed to. So, there he was, jobless, alone, the carefully constructed edifice of his life, reduced to rubble. He sat in the quiet apartment, the space feeling vast and empty. His usual coping mechanisms, planning, analyzing, bringing order, had nothing to grasp onto. The data was gone, the relationship dissolved. He scrolled through his laptop, aimlessly at first. News sites, job boards that felt insurmountable. Then the algorithm, sensing his vulnerability, offered distractions. An ad popped up, bright colors, the promise of easy money, a digital escape, a casino. He'd never gambled. It seemed illogical, a surrender to chance rather than control. But control was a luxury he no longer possessed. Hesitantly, he clicked. He deposited a small amount. The spinning reels, the flashing lights, the simulated sounds of excitement were a jarring artificial counterpoint to the crushing silence of his reality. It wasn't hope he was seeking in those first moments, but oblivion, a place to exist where the only consequences were digital, where the only loss was numerical, quantifiable, unlike the immeasurable losses he had just endured. He lost the small deposit quickly, then another. The ground was gone. All that was left was him, the empty room and the glowing screen that offered nothing but fleeting illusion and steady depletion. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle. Wake up, the silence. Make coffee, the silence. Sit in front of the laptop. The screen glowed, a constant seductive presence in the pervasive emptiness. The casino wasn't a conscious choice for entertainment, or even greed initially. It was a place to put his focus, something to do when the void of his life threatened to consume him. He tried the job boards. He sent out resumes. The rejections, when they came, were impersonal, digital echoes of the very real, very personal rejections he had already faced. Each automated email felt like another small collapse, reinforcing the feeling of helplessness. Soon the job search became less frequent. The energy required too much for his depleted reserves. The casino became the main activity. Slots mostly. They required little thought, just the repetitive click, the hypnotic spin, the chance for a small, temporary burst of artificial victory. He chased the feeling. Not the money, not really. The brief jingle of coins, the flashing win on the screen, offered a microsecond diversion from the persistent ache in his chest. He knew intellectually that the house always won. The analytical part of his brain, dormant but not dead, could calculate the odds, the expected loss. But the emotional part, raw and bleeding, craved the distraction, the possibility, however slim, of an external force bringing a win into his life. He wasn't betting recklessly, not in huge sums. He was betting consistently, small amounts that added up, a slow, steady drain on his dwindling savings. Each loss was a quiet sigh, a confirmation of his current state. Each win was a tiny, fleeting spark that died the moment the next spin began. His apartment reflected his state. Not messy, exactly. His inherent need for order prevented outright chaos, but neglected. Dust gathered. Dishes sometimes lingered. The view outside the window was the same every day. The only variability came from the patterns on the screen. He spent hours like this, silent, staring. He ate simple, often unhealthy meals in front of the computer. He slept poorly, the digital sounds of the casino sometimes echoing in his head, even when the laptop was closed. He was introspective, yes, but his thoughts circled the drain. How did I get here? What went wrong? What's the point? He saw the irony. He, the man who valued stability and control, was adrift, tethered only to a realm of pure chance. He was seeking salvation in the most unpredictable, unreliable place imaginable, a digital casino, a perfect metaphor for the external forces that had stripped his life bare. One evening, after a particularly frustrating sequence of losses that wiped out a significant chunk of his remaining funds, he closed the laptop with a quiet click. The silence in the room rushed back in, heavier than before. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city lights. They seemed so far away, part of a world he no longer inhabited. He felt a profound weariness, not just physical, but soul deep. He had hit a different kind of bottom, not necessarily financial ruin yet, but a complete depletion of hope and purpose. He had been searching for an answer on the screen, in the random outcomes of algorithms he couldn't influence, and the screen had offered nothing but a reflection of his own emptiness. In that absolute stillness, with the hum of the silent laptop the only sound, a different thought, faint but distinct, began to form. This wasn't living. This was simply waiting to lose. And somewhere deep inside, the man who once built stability knew he couldn't wait forever. The decision wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden epiphany accompanied by a soundtrack. It was born from the quiet, crushing weight of the static, the silence of the apartment, the sterile glow of the screen, the predictable pattern of digital loss. It wasn't just draining his money. It was draining his self. One morning, instead of clicking on the familiar bookmark, Tyler opened a search engine. His fingers hovered over the keys. What could he do? What was the opposite of random chance and passive waiting? Creation, building, understanding. He remembered his old fascination with how things worked, the logic behind systems. He had applied it to data analysis, but there was a deeper level, the systems themselves, the code that built the digital world he'd been staring at so passively. He typed, "How to learn programming from scratch." The results were overwhelming. Languages, frameworks, tutorials, jargon he didn't understand. It felt like standing at the base of a mountain range, armed with nothing but a dull spoon. The initial impulse was to retreat to the familiar, albeit soul-numbing comfort of the casino screen, but something held him there. The sheer difficulty was a challenge, not a deterrent. Unlike the casino, where the rules were set and unchangeable by him, here was a realm where understanding the rules allowed you to build them. It appealed to the core of the analyst he once was, the part that found satisfaction in structure and logic. He chose Python, recommended for beginners. He found a free online course. The first few lessons were simple: variables, data types, printing text. "Hello world." He typed the simple phrase, ran the code, and saw the output appear on the screen. It was a small thing, trivial even, but compared to the empty rush of a digital win, this felt real. He had commanded the machine to do something, and it had obeyed. A tiny flicker of agency in a life that had felt utterly devoid of it. The process was slow and often frustrating. Hours spent debugging a single line of code, concepts that seemed impossible to grasp. There were moments, many of them, when the allure of the easy escape, the mindless spinning reels, beckoned. He would open the casino site, stare at it, feel the old pull. But then he would remember the feeling of hitting run and seeing the code execute, the quiet satisfaction of solving a problem. The digital lights of the casino felt less bright, less appealing, next to the intricate, challenging logic of code. He started structuring his days again, albeit a new kind of structure. Wake up, coffee, code for a few hours. Take a break, code more. The silence in the apartment was still there, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the quiet clicking of his keyboard, the low hum of his laptop processing commands. He wasn't thinking about a new job yet, or rebuilding his old life. He was simply focused on the next lesson, the next exercise, the next small piece of the puzzle. He was learning for the sake of learning, for the quiet satisfaction of acquiring a skill, of building something from nothing but lines of text. He was an autodidact by necessity now, fueled by an internal drive born from the ashes of external collapse. Each concept mastered, each bug fixed, added a tiny layer of resilience, strengthening the core that had been so fragile. He was building not just skills, but an inner fortress, block by block, line by code. The static was fading, replaced by the quiet, purposeful rhythm of creation. The transition wasn't smooth. There were still days when the weight of his losses, the job, Sarah, the life he'd planned, felt overwhelming. The ghost of the casino screen, with its false promises and easy numbness, sometimes flickered at the edges of his mind. But the act of coding provided a counterweight. It demanded focus, logic, problem-solving. It was the antithesis of passive surrender to chance. Tyler immersed himself in it. Online courses, documentation, forums where developers discussed issues and shared solutions. He discovered a quiet community of people building things, solving problems, creating order out of complexity. It was a different kind of connection than he had known before, based on shared intellectual pursuit rather than emotional intimacy. It suited his silent, introspective nature. He learned Python, then moved on to web development basics, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. He built small projects, a simple calculator, a basic to-do list app, a weather widget pulling data from an API. Each working application, no matter how simple, was a victory. He learned that errors weren't failures. They were opportunities to understand the system better. This was anti-fragility in action. The stress of debugging made him stronger, his understanding deeper. The apartment slowly became less a tomb of his past and more a workshop for his future. Whiteboards appeared with diagrams and flowcharts. Books on programming languages and software architecture were stacked on tables. The air conditioning hummed, competing with the low whir of his laptop. The silence remained, but it was the silence of concentration, not despair. As his skills grew, he started thinking about what he could create. Not just exercises, but something useful. He reflected on his own journey, the chaos of losing everything, the sterile emptiness of the casino phase, the slow, deliberate process of rebuilding. He thought about the lack of control he had felt, the way external forces had dictated his fate. He wanted to build something that gave people control, structure, clarity, something that countered the allure of quick fixes and random chance. An idea began to form, a personal finance application, not just a budget tracker, but something that helped users visualize their progress, set realistic goals, understand the impact of small, consistent actions over time. The opposite of the casino's instant gratification and inevitable loss. He started sketching out the features, designing the user interface in his head. It would be clean, intuitive, focused on long-term growth and resilience. It would be built on logic and predictable outcomes, rewarding discipline and planning, the very qualities he had almost lost, but was now painstakingly rebuilding within himself. The development process was challenging. Building a robust application was far more complex than his simple exercises. There were moments of doubt, days when the code wouldn't cooperate, when the sheer scope of the project felt overwhelming. But he had learned persistence. He broke the problem down into smaller, manageable parts, just like he used to analyze data sets. He embraced the debugging process, seeing each error message not as a roadblock, but as a clue. The casino bookmark remained on his browser, a relic of a darker time. He never clicked it. The pull had faded, replaced by the quiet, consuming passion of creation. He was no longer searching for external validation or escape. He was finding purpose in the lines of code he wrote, the digital structure he was bringing into being. He was building not just an app, but tangible evidence of his own resilience. The app, which he called Anchorage after the feeling of needing something solid to hold on to, began to take shape. It wasn't flashy, but it was functional, reliable, and designed with a deep understanding of the user's need for clarity and control in uncertain financial waters. He built in features for tracking spending, setting savings goals, projecting future finances based on consistent habits. It was a tool for building stability, piece by painstaking piece. He launched it quietly on a small app store. There was no marketing budget, just a simple description detailing its purpose. He didn't expect much, but slowly downloads started to trickle in. Users left positive comments, appreciating its straightforward design and practical features. It wasn't a Silicon Valley unicorn, but it was his. The revenue from Anchorage was modest at first, a slow drip compared to the steady salary he once had, but it was earned. It was the direct result of his effort, his learning, his resilience. And it grew steadily, providing a reliable income stream that allowed him to pay his bills, restock his savings, and finally, feel a sense of financial security again. More important than the money, however, was the internal shift. He was no longer the man waiting for life to happen to him, or trying to find salvation in external sources. A job, a relationship, the random spin of a digital wheel. He had built his own anchor. He continued to work on Anchorage, adding features, responding to user feedback. He spent his days coding, refining, creating. The apartment, once a symbol of his isolation, was now his sanctuary, his workshop. The silence that used to amplify his despair now felt like a comfortable space for concentration. He rarely thought about the casino anymore, except as a stark reminder of how lost he had been. It was a symbol of chasing external, uncontrollable outcomes. He had sought salvation in a place designed for loss, in the hands of chance, in the fleeting hope offered by a machine. His journey had taught him a profound lesson. The stability he craved wasn't something granted by a job or embodied by a partner. It was an internal state, built on self-reliance, skill, and the quiet confidence that comes from having faced collapse and rebuilt yourself, stronger than before. Tyler Green, the man who valued stability above all else, had lost everything that represented it externally. But in the process, through quiet introspection, relentless self-teaching, and the anti-fragile ability to turn setbacks into strength, he had built an unshakable internal core. He was silent not because he had nothing to say, but because his most important conversations were happening internally, in the logic of code and the structure of his rebuilt life. Today he sits in his quiet apartment, the soft glow of his screen illuminating his face. It's not a casino site, but a code editor, lines of text representing order, function, and purpose. He understands now that the peace he finally feels isn't dependent on external validation or someone else's presence. It comes from knowing he can stand on his own, having built his own ground beneath his feet, one line of code at a time. He stopped looking for salvation in the arms of those who might leave, and found it within himself, the true architect of his own enduring peace. Prompts de thumbnail, estilo aquarela. Pintura em aquarela esperançosa, proporção 16:9. Retrata Tyler Green, em meio corpo, olhando para frente com determinação serena e esperança. Ele está sentado perto de uma tela de computador que lança uma luz suave em seu rosto, simbolizando sua vida reconstruída. Ao fundo, manchas de aquarela abstratas e esmaecidas sugerem elementos de cassino sombrios e lutas passadas, mas que estão recuando. O humor geral é de resiliência e novos começos, estilo aquarela.